Let's talk about Chapter 21, Plant Form and Function. Let's talk first about vegetative plant parts. Okay, normally plants, there's a lot of variety in plants, and you don't normally think of things like Venus flytraps and cacti. But these plants also have got the same parts as every other plant. They are just adapted to different habitats. And thus they have become the things like our Venus flytrap over here, one of many carnivorous plants, and cacti. But let's start at the very beginning. The parts include the roots and root system, and then the shoot, which is above ground. The shoot has stems and leaves are primarily there to produce carbohydrates and energy through photosynthesis. Some of the sugar produced in the shoot system travels through the stem to the roots, which are usually below ground. And that's the sugar. Sugar is basically glucose that is produced during photosynthesis. And you would have the taproot, which goes way down. You have lateral roots branching off of it, and a lot of plants have got what are called root hairs to increase the surface area to facilitate diffusion between the soil and the root system. Roots anchor the plant, absorb water and minerals, and they move through the stem to the leaves. Later we'll talk about water, minerals, and sugars and how they travel through the plants. Okay, leaves attach to the stems at what are called nodes. Spaces between the stems are called internodes. So a node is where a little leaf will attach. And then between the nodes, we call that the internode. Each node also features an axillary bud. That's just a shoot that could form a new branch or flower. And we can stimulate those by pruning back the terminal bud. Herbaceous versus woody. A herbaceous plant has this green soft stem, while a woody plant is made of the tough bark-covered wood. Okay? Green stems, wood stems, trees, this pepper plant. Nutrients to stay healthy. Plants have nutrient deficiencies. They will do things like this. You can learn if you become interested in growing plants, and a lot of people do. They have gardens. They find it very relaxing and a lot of fun. Okay, and they'll learn to recognize basically what nutrients are missing just by looking at things like the leaves. Now, these are some leaves that show nutrient deficiencies. I'm not a good enough horticulturist to know exactly what those mean, but I think this one is an iron deficiency, but don't hold me to that. Plants require 16 essential elements. These are some of the big ones: carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. Okay. These are all called macronutrients, and then micronutrients, little tiny amounts. Now, interestingly enough, the mass of plants, the macronutrients, they get from carbon dioxide and water. And so, as you're growing a plant, you can actually run this experiment. You can take and grow a little plant and pot it, and what you do is you weigh the dirt that's dry first, and then you put your seed in and you grow your plant up, and then you can, 6 months down the road, you can pull the plant out, knock off all the dirt, dry the dirt out, and when you weigh the dirt, it will hardly have changed. The biomass of big plants comes from primarily carbon dioxide. They take the carbon and the oxygen and use it to build the various types of plant tissues. Macronutrients, large amounts, micronutrients in smaller amounts. You can, if you grow potted plants or have a greenhouse or you do beds or things, there are many fertilizers that will have these different mixes. A lot of excuse me, a lot of plants will require different mixes of fertilizers. Now, symbiotic relationship. Nitrogen is essential for all life on this planet, and 70% of our atmosphere is made up of nitrogen. But we breathe nitrogen in and out. We can't absorb any. Okay? The only way we can get nitrogen is through eating stuff. You can eat plants or you can eat animals that ate the plants. And nitrogen gets into the plants with these little symbiotic bacteria, these little nodules, and they're able to take nitrogen out of the atmosphere and fix it in a chemical form in the plant so that when you or the meat you're going to eat eats the plant, they get nitrogen. And here are these little nitrogen nodules, is what they're called. Okay, and so they're nitrogen fixers. Plant cells build tissue. There's 3 types: ground tissue, vascular tissue, and dermal tissue. Ground tissue makes up most of the plant body. Vascular tissue is the xylem and the phloem that transports things through the plant. Vascular tissue in humans or animals consists of veins and arteries. In plants, it's xylem and phloem. Xylem moves water, phloem moves nutrients. And then the coverings of the plants, the dermal tissue, just like we have. We have epidermis that covers us and helps protect us. Plants have dermal tissue as well. Okay? And this little chart over here shows you, like in the roots, the vascular tissue is congregated right in the center. In the ground tissue, it tends to be scattered. Okay? Dermal tissue is the darker stuff. It's primarily your protective coverings, if you will. Here are some examples of ground tissue. There's parenchyma. This is most non-woody tissues, carries out photosynthesis, respiration, gas exchange, storage, other functions. There's collenchyma. This is the elastic support for growing stems and leaves. Collenchyma is very important in the structure of terrestrial plants. And sclerenchyma, this is more support and protection for plants. A good example of sclerenchyma is the shell of a pecan. Now, vascular tissues, we will compare them between the woody plants and the green plants. Now, xylem moves water. Okay, phloem moves things like sugars. Okay. In woody plants, we have tracheids, and these are called vessel elements. And basically, these tracheids use capillary action to draw water up through the plants in wood. Okay? In the green herbaceous stems, you have sieve tube elements. You have a sieve tube and a sieve plate, and these sieve plates are one-way valves, so water moves up through what is called capillary action, and it only has to basically diffuse up in small amounts. And so once you get water in this one, it can't go back down. So as more water is moved up into this pocket, eventually it pushes it into here, and now we keep going. And so it just leapfrogs. And there's usually a constant stream of water coming from the soil and the roots up through the sieve tubes or the tracheids all the way up to the water starts exiting through various types of stomata or pores in the plant. Here is a dermal tissue, covers the plant. It's called an epidermis, and a lot of them are coated with this waxy cuticle, that shiny part on a leaf. And then you have these little stomata. And the cuticle conserves water, protects the plant. The stomata allows it to exchange gases. So carbon dioxide goes in, oxygen comes out, but also water comes out of these stomata. And so the plant, depending on conditions, can either open or close these stomata. The structures they use to open and close the stomata are called guard cells. Tissues build stems, leaves, and roots. Okay. Ground tissue occupies most of the stem of a herbaceous plant. Vascular bundles are embedded, and then the outer covering is called your dermal tissues. Simple leaves versus compound leaves. Here is a simple leaf. Okay, it's got a blade. Now this is a dicot because it has branching veins. Here are different types of compound leaves. And notice that these little leaflets are separated and on this stem. Now these are all dicots as well. We can tell because we have branching leaves. Okay. They come off of a node. And here's an axillary bud. So if we trim off the terminal bud, the apical meristem, this will add another branch right there. This is how we make our plants look bushier. Monocot leaves. Here they are. They're parallel. And this would be a dicot leaf. The veins are branching. When stomata are open, mesophyll cells exchange gases with the atmosphere. Mesophyll cells also exchange materials with the vascular tissues. So water and nutrients diffuse out or in depending on what's needed at the time. Mesophyll, here's a leaf. This is a cross section of a leaf. This is the waxy, the little green layer on top is the waxy cuticle. This is the epidermis. Here you can see a stomata or opening. Okay. The root surrounds a central core of vascular tissue. Fibrous roots versus tap roots. Fibrous roots just have lots and lots of branchings. A tap root has one main root that goes straight down and then branches off of it. Okay. Monocots are very typical of having fibrous roots. Tap roots tend to be found in dicots. Now they're saying eudicots, and that is technically correct, but we have monocots and dicots is the way that it's usually pronounced, and so dicots will and eudicots are synonyms. Here is a good picture of root hairs. Okay, and so here we can see soil and there's water in here, and here are your little root hairs, and water is diffusing into the root hair. There's the little water molecules moving over into the roots, and then through vascular tissue is moved up to the various tissues that need it. Flexible growth patterns. Some plants never stop growing. There it's called indeterminate growth. Plants that stop growing when they reach their mature size have determinate growth. Plants grow by adding units or modules consisting of repeated nodes and internodes. Growth occurs at meristems. This is where mitosis is taking place. Okay, the apical meristem is the highest meristem in the plant. It's the one making the plant taller. Then you have lateral meristems that are making it bushier. Okay, thickens the roots and stems. This growth occurs at lateral meristems. Primary growth occurs at the apical meristems. New cells can differentiate into any type of tissue. Here is the root. Now the root cap is a hardened area, and then your apical meristems, instead of going up, are going down on different root types. You can see some microscopic versions of that. Vascular cambium. Secondary growth occurs in woody plants. Two types of lateral meristems produce wood and bark. Vascular and cork cambiums. The vascular cambium produces xylem inside of the stem and secondary phloem toward the outside. The cork produces parenchyma cells toward the inside and dense waxy-like cells called cork toward the outside. Cork is the outer protective layer of bark. So there is the bark. Okay. Secondary xylem eventually becomes unable to conduct water, forming heartwood. It basically fills up with sap. Tree rings arise from alternating moist and dry seasons. Wood that forms in the spring has larger cells than wood that forms in the summer. The lighter sapwood, which tends to be out towards the periphery, transports water and dissolved minerals. Okay. Vascular tissue forms a transportation system. Xylem and phloem function in different ways. Here is a pepper plant. Okay, so these are the different types of vascular bundles. They vary between the stems and the roots. Okay. Xylem is explained by cohesion tension theory. All right, basically, water molecules will, because they are polar, will form cohesive bonds, which can be very strong. The cohesion of the water pulls adjacent molecules up through the system, and there's a constant flow from the roots all the way out through the leaves. And when one molecule of water evaporates through a stoma on a leaf, it pulls all the other ones up towards it. Okay, and it goes down through these tracheids, and then these little plates between the tracheids are one-way valves, so it's constantly drawing. It's called cohesion or capillary action to draw up water. Parasitic plants tap into the vascular tissue of other plants. Mistletoe roots literally burrow through the epidermis of the tree and connect to its xylem and phloem. Mistletoe, close that window. Mistletoe will kill trees. Okay, and most mistletoe, I've never seen any mistletoe with red berries. I don't know where they come from. Most mistletoe has this white waxy berry. Mistletoe is toxic. It's poisonous. Somehow they decided, I guess, red berries look better for Christmas or something. I don't know. Hidden cost of traps. Carnivorous plants have modified leaves that trap invertebrates, and there's a lot of different kinds. But when you have these areas that are used to attract the animals, like insects, in so that they can eat them, that reduces the amount of area for photosynthesis. For instance, on a Venus flytrap, a lot of people kill them because they constantly touch the little traps with their fingers, and there's only enough energy in one of those traps to close 2 or 3 times. And so then they die. And so if people are, if you own one and you're constantly using your finger to show one shut, so you can watch it, it won't be able to eat the insects, and it will not be able to get enough energy and die. A lot of them too will give off odors that are not necessarily pleasant, usually something along the lines of rotting meat. And that attracts the insects, and the insects are stuck in sticky stuff, or they fall in like this pitcher plant. It's got fluid in there, and they're able to digest it. These carnivorous plants are pretty fascinating. Okay, so certainly worth taking a look at. That wraps up chapter 21.